Good morning. This is Ben Tendo. I'm a clinical psychologist in Las Vegas, the capital of play, and I'm also a hardcore Nintendo fan. And today I want to talk about an interesting concept. I once had a person in my life who was a pretty bad influence. I'm not going to go into too many details, but he was kind of running in some sketchy circles. And I was doing some sketchy things at one point in my life that I'm not proud of. Anyway, one of the things that he used to say to me sometimes was, keep your enemies closer than your friends. And it's one of those statements that I think you have to, it's one of those like kind of reality checks. And it's probably more true if you're doing stupid things that are going to get you into trouble, and you're running in dangerous circles with unsavory people. In that kind of a situation, it's probably true. I don't think it's true in every situation. However, once I got past that pretty bad phase of my life, I got to a much better phase where I was clean and sober. So obviously it was related to my substance abuse problems. But I don't want to go into details. That's a world I'd like to disattach from as much as possible and focus on my recovery. But this idea, keep your enemies closer than your friends, it's actually a really important idea in playing video games. And I think it actually is a lesson for life. Not so much about thinking of enemies as even outside of us, but like the enemies inside of us, right? So often, like in organized religion, they talk about the devil. Like the devil is this thing out there, and if you believe that, all power to you. But I think a more nuanced understanding is the idea that the devil is something inside all of us, right? We all have good and bad in all of us. No one person is all good or all bad. There aren't bad people, and there aren't good people either. People are a mix of both. So we all have kind of enemies inside of us. And one thing I love about video games is they kind of create this elaborate, mythological, maybe simplified kind of atmosphere, environment, universe where you get to play out this kind of imagined battle between good and evil. So one thing I've realized when I'm playing on a video game, and video games have easy parts, usually at the beginning, and then there's more challenging parts. And one thing I find is the challenging parts, sometimes they cause me some frustration, right? And I much prefer something that's a little moderately challenging, that's easy to beat, than something where I'm like having to try over and over to beat this same enemy, and it's frustrating, right? And the same goes for life, right? We like it when things go well, and when we have some major setback, or when we experience the same problem over and over, we get frustrated and kind of demoralized, and it's discouraging, and discourage. It kind of breaks down our courage. It's a tough thing to deal with in life and in video games. So one thing I've learned while playing video games is that if I get stuck on some particular level, or there's some enemy that I'm having a hard time overcoming, that oftentimes the problem is actually that I'm not paying enough attention to the enemy itself, right? Like I'm so focused on being, focused on my goal, focused on my character, focused on getting to the end of the level, And I think even some of it actually is kind of our cultural bias towards focusing on the good, focusing on the positive. And so in a way, I think what happens sometimes is I fail to really study my enemy the way I should, right? So, I'll give you an example from this morning. So I right now I'm playing Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. That's actually one of my all-time favorite games. Quite possibly my favorite game of all time, to be honest. Probably not that, but it's one of the tops. It's a pretty incredible game. So it's a spin-off actually from Super Mario Odyssey, which is a mind-blowing, incredible game also. And so anyway, on Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, there's, a lot of Mario games will have these like final levels that are just extremely difficult. Like they're just like beyond difficult, like it really pushes you to your absolute limits. And it's really challenging, and a lot of people, unless you're super, ultra highly skilled at video games, you might have to play that same level over and over and over till you finally get good at beating it. Because it's really, a stretch beyond your current skill level. So I've been playing this. There's this kind of like bonus. I bought Captain Toad Treasure Tracker a few years ago, and then they actually kind of, when you download a game, sometimes they'll update it. So they added these extra levels. So I was excited, and I played through all of those. And then this last level is kind of this like 30 phase level where you have to beat 30 different levels. And then, and then when you finish it, they have, for completionists, they have all these extra things you can do. And of course, I always have to do every single thing. So this extra task they have is like, as you go through the levels, there's, extra characters that you can pick up and bring with you. And basically what you have to do is get all 3 of your characters that you pick up to go with you to the end of all 30 levels, and none of them get killed, which is extremely difficult, right? And so I've been playing this same level over and over and over, and I'll play it for a while, set it aside, play it again, and I'm getting better. I'm getting better at it. And today I got farther than I have ever before. And you have to celebrate those little tidbits of progress. They actually feel really good. And so as I was getting better and better at it, I realized all of a sudden in this one particular part where there are these birds that like, they kind of fly above you, and then they just drop down, and they kept dropping down and hitting one of the people on my team and killing them. And then that way it's like, oh, I have to reset the whole thing. I have to start over. You have to get through the whole thing. It's a very challenging thing to do. But I realized in that moment that I actually was not studying my enemies closely enough, right? Because these birds are very sneaky. They fly above, and then, and you have to, what I've realized I have to do is I have to, when I'm playing a challenging level, I have to allow my consciousness to fully absorb and stay connected to all of the aspects of the level, and especially the enemies, right? Like sometimes I have to focus on the enemies more than on myself. And in fact, often that's the case because they're the thing I have to overcome. So, you have to like really give them your attention, and I don't want to say fall in love with them, but you have to become connected with them, very deeply connected with your enemies. So that's why I like that phrase, keep your enemies closer than your friends. You have to become friends with them in a weird kind of way, in the sense that you're hyper aware of them, and exactly, like you can see the shadows of those birds, on the ground, and don't think that you're being optimistic or positive or hopeful by ignoring your enemies. That's a stupid strategy that gets you killed. So you got to really like be hyper aware of those enemies, and then when you do that, then you can overcome them. So I think it's a really important lesson for life. I'm very anti-war. I'm actually a Quaker religiously, so I'm extremely anti-war. And when I talk about enemies, I'm really talking about the enemies inside of us, right? So one of my enemies inside of me is self-pity. And I have a whole list of enemies inside of myself. I'm really a big believer in 12-step recovery. And one thing I love about it is it does teach you to become accountable for your own behavior, for your own personal defects, for the enemies inside of you that keep you from being happy, from fulfilling your purpose, from serving others. And so I have to be really hyper aware of those. And so I guess this is kind of a testimonial also for just the 12-step process, which is extremely powerful. And it's based on an older tradition called the Oxford Group. It kind of comes out of Christianity, but it's not traditional Christianity. So don't worry about that if you have issues with that. So yeah, it's been a real kind of enlightening realization for me to realize through playing video games that you actually got to really face your demons. You've got to stare down your own shadows. You're not being optimistic or hopeful or bring in any benefit by ignoring the parts of yourself that aren't good. And the last thing I'll share is that for the past 5 months plus, I've been going through a really, really, really bad depression. It was just so bad for a while, like, oh, super bad. And I was very, very not wanting to be on the earth, not wanting to be here anymore, and really just having to take it one day at a time. And I started over time. I was going to my meetings and staying clean and sober, and one of the things that really helped me was to kind of develop some prayers that I say every morning. And prayers are mantras, right? They're a form of self-hypnosis to get us in that right frame of mind where we are the conquerors in our lives, and we're ruling our minds rather than our minds ruling us, even though it's all one and the same, but you know, I think you know what I mean. So the words are pointers, as Eckhart Tolle would say. So speaking of Eckhart Tolle, one thing that I learned from him, because I listen to him every day for 20 minutes in the morning, he's a genius. And one thing that he shared once was this mantra from a Zen Buddhist monk. The story goes that everybody went to this monk and said, "You're so peaceful, how can I overcome my problems and achieve the same kind of peace that you have?" And this monk said, "Well, just several times a day throughout the day, say out loud, 'Thanks for everything, I have no complaints whatsoever.'" And you just say that over and over. And then, and apparently everyone's lives got better. Some people's didn't, but then, I don't know. Anyway, but the bottom line is that's a very wise thing to say. And I've adopted that. I say that every morning as part of my morning prayer. And I say it as I need to. Thanks for everything. I have no complaints whatsoever. And why do I say that? Because I am a complainer. I am a big complainer. I'm super negative just by default. That's the enemy inside me that I've got to be so aware of. Like, I'm always going to the negative. I'm always, talking myself down or going into self-pity or looking at how bad my life is or future tripping, worrying about the future, or past tripping, right? Like thinking about all the things I missed in the past and doing anything but just being present in the moment and just taking the moment in a visceral, sensory, bodily way, in a way that involves the body and the breath. That's where life is in this moment, in the body and the breath, not in all the nonsense that goes on in our minds. So be aware of your enemies, your internal enemies, right? We invent all these enemies we create with wars, and I think that's all a bunch of BS. I think it's all about money and greed and all that kind of stuff, colonialism, etc. That stuff. That's not even what I'm addressing, because that's actually a downfall of humanity. And I'm a Quaker. I'm extremely, extremely anti-war and extremely pro-peace. But we do have enemies inside us, and we need to be aware of them. And sometimes we have to be every bit as aware, if not more aware, of our personal defects and malfunctions as with our gifts and positive qualities. We got to be aware of those as well. But you got to be so aware of where you misstep, of where your mind and where your personal conduct and your way of thinking and being, where they get you into trouble. You got to be aware of it. Don't try to ignore it. Face it and stare it down. And that's the only way to overcome it. So I say that all the time. I say, thanks for everything. I have no complaints whatsoever. And what that does is it just kind of like, it's like an axe right in my forehead. Just whoosh, like shut the blank bleepity bleep up. It really just silences my mind, because I can always come up with complaints, but there's no need. There's really no need, because it doesn't serve me. It's kind of a maladaptive habit that I've formed over the years, but I'm getting better. I'm training my mind like I train myself with video games. Okay, that's it for today. Love you guys. I'm trying to make each of these videos a little bit better. I know that they're still pretty amateur. They're still pretty What's that old movie, the horror movie, the Blair Witch Trial? These are my Blair Witch Trial videos, so one day someone's gonna listen to all these. I hope and pray. Actually, I don't care. I do care, but I don't. I'm doing it for me. It's making me feel better, actually. So, okay. Go be ridiculous. Have a fun day. Love you. Big hug. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.